What's up, guys? Welcome back to the MMA Meeting. Let's Talk with the Weasle podcast, where we talk all things MMA. I hope you guys have an amazing day. There's no UFC fights this weekend. We have some one fights on Friday, so that's something to look forward to. Firstly, the event was pretty good. There were a lot of good finishes. Amanda Ribas's wheel kick was pretty cool. Michael Morales just being too much of an athlete, too much of a just specimen for Jake Matthews. Chase Hooper putting out an excellent performance of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu against Jordan Levitt. The guy's really growing into his own, and I like him at lightweight a lot more than featherweight. Peyton Tabet had a good performance as well. Oralby with a 2-day notice submitting Uroš Medic, who's a good fighter, by the way. I did not expect that to happen. I thought Medic probably was going to get that win. Brito gained the submission against Pierce after Pierce was telling him, get up, do something. A lot of good performances throughout the whole card. But what about Cruz's commentary during the whole thing? Why does the guy want to argue all the time? Bro argues too much. There's some points to argue, of course, but you don't have to argue everything. Paul Felder's just trying to commentate, make it interesting for the fans, and Cruz just wants to make a debate out of it. Cruz does sometimes have a point, right? Sometimes he is correct, but then sometimes he doesn't have a good point. It's so funny, though. It'd be like, let's say the other commentator, Paul Felder, would start saying, oh, he's hurt. But then Cruz would be like, what exactly do you mean by hurt, Paul? Felder could be like, that's a big straight he just hit him with, Dom. And then Cruz would be like, it did connect, but that wasn't technically straight. The arm arced by 5 degrees, so technically not a straight. Felder could be like, he's crushing it with ground and pound, Dom. Oh, big hammer fist. And then Cruz would be like, the bottom fighter is clearly only gassing him out. This isn't smart for him to keep punching, and the fight gets finished. Or Felder could be like, he rocked him with that overhand. Then Dom would be like, how do we know he just isn't playing possum? Oh, and that wasn't hook, by the way. Get with it, Paul. The guy argues for no reason sometimes. Dominick Cruz obviously knows a lot about techniques and skills and stuff, but he's one of those guys that overanalyzes sometimes, like a little too much. There's a point where you look way too deep, and you're not seeing the overall picture anymore. That's why good analysis is not always about how deep and overly technical you can get. Sometimes when you get way too technical and way too deep, you're not even really seeing what's happening here anymore. And Bellator is no longer a thing. So in fact, Bellator 301, the one I covered in my video, was the last Bellator event ever. They have been absorbed into the PFL. So not only is the PFL going to have a much larger roster, they're looking to put on a champ versus champ event to unify the champions in the PFL. So you can see the Bellator heavyweight champ versus the PFL heavyweight champ, Ryan Bader versus Ante Delia, and this is going to happen for all of the divisions. Now, I don't know if they're all going to fight on one event. If they do, that's going to be quite an exciting card, right? That's going to be one of the few MMA events outside the UFC that could be very interesting for the MMA fans. All we know about it is that it's going to be in 2024. We don't know if it's later in the year. We don't know if Francis Ngannou is going to fight Ante Delia for the heavyweight championship before Ryan Bader does. But I think regardless, Ngannou is going to fight the heavyweight champ. Can you imagine Ryan Bader versus Francis Ngannou? I honestly think that could be one of Ngannou's fastest knockouts in his career. Bader is fast, he can wrestle, he is well-rounded, but one touch and he's quivering. And I'll never forget the performance that he put on against Anthony Johnson. It was one of the few times it looked like a fighter was absolutely terrified of his opponent. And not terrified in the sense that, Tom Aspinall talks about, like, oh, this guy's scary, that guy's scary, and it makes him sharper. No, Ryan Bader looked like he was spooked in front of Anthony Johnson. He shot a takedown from the third row. Johnson easily defended it, got on top of him, and pummeled him until a finish. And if he reacted that way in front of Rumble, can you imagine how he reacts to Ngannou in front of him? You also do have to remember that Ryan Bader has mostly fought old fighters. Outside of maybe Phil Davis, Linton Vassell, and of course Valentin Moldavsky, who is even younger than Ryan Bader, every other opponent he fought was a bit too old, right? They were in the game a little too long, definitely past their primes, like King Mo, like Little Nog, like Fedor twice, Lyoto, Matt Mitrione. The only old guy that may not have been past his prime was maybe Cheick Kongo, because he went on a crazy win streak before he lost to Timothy Johnson. But then again, he lost to Timothy Johnson. Timothy Johnson couldn't get anywhere in the UFC. These are the kind of guys that Ryan Bader is fighting. Picture what Ngannou would do to them, and he will put Ryan Bader on that same list. He will make Ryan Bader look like these other guys as well. The heavyweight division in Bellator is not that strong. It's much stronger in the UFC. If Ryan Bader was in the UFC, I don't even know if he makes top 5 in the heavyweight division. I mean, think about who's in the top 5. Of course, Jones is champ, Tom Aspinall, Ciryl Gane, Sergey Pavlovich, Stipe, and Curtis Blades. I don't think Ryan Bader beats any of these guys outside of maybe Stipe, and only for the fact that Stipe is walking with a cane. He could probably stylistically beat Volkov. Does he beat Jailton Almeida? He could beat Almeida because he is a better striker and he's more well-rounded. He's a good wrestler that can stop the takedowns. Almeida could get lost on the feet. He might be able to beat Almeida. So I would say Ryan Bader is right outside the top 5. He's right there. Bader is at best right now number 5 if he was in the UFC. I would put Ryan Bader after Curtis Blades, but he could be better than Stipe at the moment. So he would be like number 6 overall if you put Jones at number 1. And if you count all the other heavyweights like Francis Ngannou, Ante Delia, and all the other heavyweights, Ryan Bader is probably number 7 or number 8 in the world. Whereas I believe Ngannou is number 1. I think Ngannou still is the best heavyweight on the planet in terms of like who can beat him and who can't. I think Tom Aspinall is Ngannou's toughest fight, especially John Jones tearing his chest. Aspinall's only going to get better from that Sergey Pavlovich fight, which is very scary. The guy didn't even have a training camp. Imagine what he's able to bring into a new training camp after the experience of Sergey Pavlovich with newfound confidence. Aspinall in his next fight is going to be a monster. He's going to be very hard to beat. And that next fight should be John Jones, but we all know Jones doesn't seem like he wants to fight Aspinall at all. But with Bellator and PFL, the other champs that I'm very interested to see fight are Usman Nurmagomedov versus Olivier Aubin-Mercier, because I think Olivier is the second best fighter in the PFL after Ngannou. Olivier has been putting on a massive win streak in the PFL right now. He is technically much better than he was in the UFC, and even in the UFC, he wasn't bad. He had some good skills. He was well-rounded and fought some good fighters, but he took it to a different level in the PFL. It's hard to really know exactly what level that is because he's not fighting the same level of competition anymore. The only really good guy he fought was Shane Burgos. Shane Burgos is always a featherweight. He went up to the lightweight division, so he's fighting guys his size now. And Burgos is probably not going to have the same kind of success he did in the featherweight division as a bit of a weight bully. If we're going to be completely honest here, Shane Burgos was a bit too big for featherweight. I mean, that guy was towering over most of the guys there, and he was wide, huge upper body. I wouldn't be surprised if he was walking around close to 180. Look who Aubin-Mercier was fighting in the UFC. He fought Arman Tsarukyan, Gilbert Burns, Drew Dober, Carlos Diego Ferreira, albeit he lost to most of these guys. That Anthony Rocco Martin fight, it's still crazy. I think Martin won that fight. He was also doing pretty well in the UFC, if you remember him. His big performance was submitting Jake Matthews. But a lot of people did think that Rocco Martin was robbed against Olivier Aubin-Mercier. But I do think Usman Nurmagomedov should be able to beat Olivier, but this is why it's interesting, because what if it goes the other way? What if Olivier beats Usman? That would be a bit shocking, because it looks like a lot of people do think that Usman is one of the best lightweights in the world. I think he is as well. It's hard to know for sure, but looking at his skills and what he's able to do out there at only 25 years old, I don't know if he turned 26 yet, the guy looks good and promising moving forward. The only thing is, what happened with that drug test? And the failed drug test happened right before their last event, and they're not even telling us what he popped for. Why was it never announced? What was the substance? Why did he only get 6 months? And all they said was that it wasn't a big deal. He didn't try to cheat. It was something in his medication. But what is that thing? What was in his medication? The fact that they're not disclosing it and it happened right before their last event makes you put on that tinfoil hat, you know what I'm saying? Or it just could be, it was nothing. It could be that. But the substance is important to know, because look at all the Russian scandals that's happened throughout history. If you know about all the athletes from Russia that popped for PEDs, I mean, this is an important thing to talk about, right? This is not just a country that sometimes athletes pop for stuff. No, this is a long history with Russian athletes that allegedly, systemically, were given leeway for PEDs. I mean, they were exiled from the Olympics, right? The Russian athletes were not even allowed to compete in the Olympics. And there's a former Russian athlete that are alleging that 99% of the Russian athletes have taken performance-enhancing drugs. There's not just a couple Russian athletes who are doping. It's deep. They were banned from the 2018 Winter Olympics. I've never heard this before. I've never heard an entire country get banned from participating because of a doping issue. And remember, this is Bellator. Usman Nurmagomedov is not part of the UFC, and Bellator does not have an official partner for drug testing like the UFC does with USADA. The UFC is a different kind of thing because there isn't some state drug testing body, so it's a little bit different there. But with Bellator or some of the other organizations, fighters can really get by with a lot of stuff, man. And after watching Icarus, I believe most of the fighters are probably on something. This is not to point fingers at an entire camp, but Islam also did pop for something in his medication before. And we know what he popped for was meldonium. If you guys don't know what meldonium is, it helps oxygen travel to your muscles. So it helps with performances, of course, like cardio and stuff. You don't get as fatigued and you can recover better, right? I think this drug test happened in 2016. And you guys know my opinions about PEDs. I think every fighter will do it if they can get away with it. Every single fighter. There is not a fighter on this planet, I think, that wouldn't do it if they could. I've watched too many documentaries. I've read too much information about what hoops athletes will jump through to get on PEDs. And especially happens over there in Russia. That's the only thing I'm saying, man. We know that Russia does have a big history with PEDs. That's something that's been documented for many years. We're talking about the Olympic Games, man. The Olympic Games are supposed to have strict drug testing. And they were doing stuff back in the 80s. They were doing stuff in 2008. They were manipulating their urine samples during the Beijing Olympics. Even in the 2010 Winter Olympics, the International Association of Athletic Federations back in 2009 said that the blood samples of the Russian athletes have, quote, recorded some of the highest values ever seen since they started testing. Even in 2010, the Russian anti-doping agency sent info to WADA, who usually tests for the Olympics and stuff, alleging that the Russian anti-doping agency enables doping for its athletes. And then in 2012, a disc thrower from Russia, someone who competed during the London 2012 Olympics, I forgot her last name, but I remember her first name is Daria. She sent an email to WADA that had details of an alleged state-run doping program in Russia. And this email reached the higher-ups of WADA. And dude, it's funny, she herself failed a drug test more than once in a move that she believed was retaliation for what she told WADA about, because she was suspended by the Russian Athletes Federation. And what was funny was the results of one of those drug tests during 2012 was annulled, which is going to have her Olympic medal taken away from her. There was some stuff that happened in 2015. There was a lot of stuff that happened in 2016. I don't want to go through the whole history here. And it was so bad that they were banning Russian athletes even as recent as last year. And stuff was happening even as recent as 2022. Now, this is not my story. These are not things I came up with. All of this is publicly reported. You can read all of this stuff. It's a long, long list. And when I watched some of these documentaries, read some of these articles, and especially in Russia, I am not going to doubt any athlete to not take PEDs. That's all I'm saying. I don't know how much of a difference there is with Dagestan and the mainland of Russia. I don't know if it's the same kind of thing or something. I really don't know the history, other than there was some conflicts that happened there. The only thing I know about Dagestan, they've been part of many different empires during its history. They were part of the Parthian Empire. They were part of the Sasanian Empire or the Persians. The Romans did fight with the Persians to try to take it over. I just know more of like the ancient history of that region, nothing really too recent. So I don't know the relationships between Russia, like the mainland of Russia, and Dagestan. I don't know what their whole thing is. I can go on about like history with the battles and all that stuff. I know a lot about it, man. I would say after MMA, the thing I know most about is history with like generals and battles and wars and all that stuff. That's what I know most about after MMA. I would actually love to make a separate podcast just talking about stuff like that. The greatest battle ever won, in my opinion, is the Siege of Kruya of 1450. I might be biased, but by the numbers, whenever has an 8,000 strong army beaten 100,000 men on the other side. And early use of guerrilla tactics was a big point of that fight. It was a siege against a castle, so you know siege against castles are much more difficult than open land battles and stuff like that. So there was an advantage for the 8,000, but then again, there's only 4,000 in the garrison. Another amount of troops were on the outside using guerrilla tactics and won that battle. The Siege of Korea happened many times, but 1450 specifically was a major success. And historians, even now, you're starting to see more people that understand history going down that road of saying that battle is one of the most absurd victories in terms of numbers in history. It's a battle that a lot of people don't know about. But yeah, Siege of Korea, if any of you guys are fans of history, look up that battle. It's the most absurd battle won ever, at least that I know of. And a lot of people are saying the same thing, that it is the most absurd battle ever won in terms of numbers. But some of the other battles to take note of is the Siege of Beijing from Genghis Khan, of course. One of the craziest is the Battle of Austerlitz by Napoleon, who fought two major powers at the same time. The American Revolution with Washington, of course, right? That's one of the craziest. Washington actually lost most of the battles, but he won the war. He was a master tactician, man. You have the Battle of the Yarmouk by Khalid and Julius Caesar's Battle of Lygia. These are like the main ones I can think of. These are like the main 5 or 6 biggest victories ever. Do you guys ever hear of Mad Jack Churchill during World War II? Mad Jack Churchill was a British soldier who came into battle with a sword and a bow and arrow. This guy came with a sword and bow and arrow into a battlefield filled with tanks, firearms, all of that stuff, everything. And this guy came with a sword. And they asked him why. Why did he do that? His answer to it was, a warrior's not properly dressed without his sword. And he had the only confirmed bow and arrow kill during the entire Second World War. He took out a lieutenant with a bow and arrow. But the guy was kind of crazy. When they told him what were his thoughts when the World War ended, he said if it wasn't for those Yanks, it would have still have gone on. He wanted it to continue. That's how twisted this guy was in the head. But those are the kind of warriors you do want on the battlefield, right? Some people are for certain things. There's some guys who are meant to be doctors. There's some guys who are meant to be pharmacists, right? There's some guys that are meant to be accountants. There's some guys that are meant to be garbage truck drivers, right? Someone's got to do it. And then there's guys who are meant to be on the front lines of battle. And Mad Jack Churchill is one of those guys. What about Dominick Cruz's commentary? And with that, let's go right to the questions. So we go to our first question. Hello, Weasle. Great vids as usual, man. Here's some fantasy matchups. Who do you think wins and why? How do you think they win? And how surprised would you be if the person you pick against won? So Song Yadong versus Umar. I'd go with Umar by a decision. I think the wrestling would be the biggest difference of the fight. I think he would be able to take Song down enough and control him, but ultimately not finishing him in a 3-round fight. If Song were to beat Umar, I would not be surprised. Arnold Allen versus Alexander Volkanovski. I think Volk beats Allen in pretty much every department. Would I be shocked if Allen were to beat Volk? Only if Volk is still like in his prime. Then yes, I would be kind of shocked that Allen beats him. Edson Barboza versus Max Holloway. I would definitely go with Max Holloway. He put on way too much pressure on Barboza in a 5-round fight. Those championship rounds are going to be something out of a nightmare for Barboza. The momentum will build up way too much, and Barboza will not have what it takes in order to get Holloway away from him. Barboza does have the leg kicks to go to. He does have a power advantage, but I would be slightly surprised if Barboza beat Holloway. Brian Ortega versus Aljamain Sterling if Sterling moves up. I'd probably go with Ortega, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if Sterling were to beat him. I think the biggest reason as to why Ortega would most likely win is number one, he's come back from a layoff before and showed up pretty good against the Korean Zombie. That was almost a 2-year layoff after the Holloway fight. He's going to be bigger than Sterling, have way more power in the stand-up. Both guys are not necessarily amazing strikers, but I do think that Ortega is a better striker technically. If Sterling were to beat Ortega, I wouldn't be too surprised. Dustin Poirier versus Jalen Turner. I think Dustin absolutely dominates and finishes him. Everything about Poirier's stand-up is too much. Jalen Turner may be precise enough inside of those combinations to catch Poirier with something. He is a kind of fighter that will throw back. He could potentially catch Poirier with some elbows, considering how long he is. But I think Poirier puts way too much pressure on him and finishes him with a barrage. Would I be surprised if Jalen Turner beats Dustin Poirier? I'd be like moderately surprised. Michael Chandler versus Benoit Saint Denis. I'm going to go with Michael Chandler because Benoit does get hit a little too much for my liking, especially in that Thiago Moises fight. He was fighting Moises, so he can be a little bit more reckless in the stand-up against that guy, but if he shows up the same way against Chandler, he will get dropped. Benoit has a potential to go further in the fight and overwhelm a gassing Michael Chandler, but if he does not tighten up that defense, I see Chandler finishing him by TKO. So I'll go with Chandler. Would I be surprised if Benoit beat Chandler? Absolutely not even a little bit. Justin Gaethje versus Alexander Volkanovski if Volk moves up. I'll go with Gaethje in this one. I think he has way too much power. Volk would not be able to trade with him whatsoever. He'll be hammering Volk with big leg kicks as well, and he won't get taken to the ground. Justin also does have that big head kick that can get to Volk, condition him off of damaging leg kicks, and he is pretty mobile, so perhaps he'll be able to get in there and land some good punches, but his patient style would try to get Volkanovski to walk into his shots while taking big leg kicks. I think the leg kicks and the head kicks are going to force Volk to be more offensive, and from there I can see Gaethje countering him. Gaethje's also bigger than him, he's way more powerful. I have to go with Justin Gaethje. But would I be surprised if Volk beat Gaethje? Not at all. And then Khabib versus Strickland, as Islam claimed that if Khabib wanted that fight, it'll be no effort for him to beat Strickland. Okay, I understand he was holding down Luke Rockhold in training, which is pretty crazy, but I think in a full-on fight, Strickland absolutely beats Khabib. The size difference is massive. Strickland would walk around 25 pounds heavier than Khabib. He's also a way more precise puncher, a much better boxer, and his size alone could create more issues for Khabib to take him to the ground. Would I be surprised if Khabib beat Strickland? I would be somewhat surprised. Bo Nickel versus Joe Pyfer. Right now, I got Joe Pyfer. I think he would catch him and knock him out. Show some good takedown defense in there. Would I be surprised if Bo Nickel beat Joe Pyfer? Not at all. And then Khamzat Chimaev versus Jared Cannonier. I would go with Khamzat in a 3-round fight, but in a 5-round fight, I would pick Cannonier. Would I be surprised if Cannonier beat Khamzat in a 3-round fight? No, I wouldn't. And then would I be surprised if Khamzat beat Cannonier in a 5-round fight? I would be surprised slightly. Then we go to the worst box. 3 Morenos versus 1 Pavlovich. I'll go with 3 Morenos. So then we go to Butterbell. If Alex Pereira, for some reason, decided to jump up to heavyweight and go for the triple champ status, how do you think he would do against the top 15? I don't think he would become a triple champ, but let's see here. He beats Marcos Rogério de Lima. Nascimento has some decent grappling for a big guy, so I can see him getting Pereira down, but I think Pereira might still get the win. There's a lot of holes in the feet for Nascimento, and he doesn't attempt that many takedowns. He beats Nascimento. He beats Romanov even though he shouldn't. He beats Rosenstrike. He beats Derek Lewis. Beats Tibora. Beats Tuivasa. These guys are actually very good styles for him. Spivak. I think he should be able to beat Spivak because he's so much faster, and Spivak's striking is not there at all. He also doesn't shoot as much, right? He usually gets his takedowns from the clinch, and it's going to be hard for him to get a hold of Alex Pereira, given the massive speed difference between the two and the footwork difference. Pereira isn't a big mover, but he would adapt to become more mobile against the heavyweights. He would have to. And even what he's shown already, he would be too quick with his feet regardless. Compared to Spivak, maybe not against Cyril Gane or Tom Aspinall, but against flat-footed, double left foot Spivak, Gelatin Almeida. I think Almeida beats Alex Pereira because Almeida will get him to the ground. His Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is dangerous enough to, I would think, submit him, but then again, he didn't submit Derek Lewis. I think he should be able to at least dominate on top, and he has the kind of cardio to never gas out doing it too. Taking down a guy like Alex Pereira, who's around the same size as Almeida, wouldn't be too difficult for Almeida to do, in my opinion. Volkov, I would actually go with Pereira, but that would be a difficult fight for him. I would like to go with Curtis Blades, but we know that fight IQ is not too high. I'll go with Blades, but I wouldn't be shocked if Pereira knocked him out. Stipe. I'd probably go with Stipe, but, he's a bit up there in age now, so I wouldn't be shocked at all if Pereira knocked him out. Sergey Pavlovich. This may be a hot take. I'd probably go with Pereira, unless Pavlovich takes him down, right? That's the only other thing. But Pavlovich's striking, it's technical for heavyweight. Pereira's striking is technical regardless of the weight class. And he has the kind of power that can hurt Sergey. I think Sergey could take some of his big shots, but eventually I think he would crumble. A lot of the stuff that Sergey does is something that Pereira has seen a million times. Sergey's not like an unorthodox, weird kind of striker. He does get off balance sometimes. He will take the horse stance. He will get parallel, and that's not a good thing against someone like Pereira. The thing that Sergey has going for him is the chin, the power, the reach. Attributes is what Sergey has. Skills and techniques are all on Pereira's side, completely. And I think in a fight like that, I think Pereira's skills and technique would triumph. Cyril Gane. I'd actually go with Pereira. That might be a hot take too. I think because these guys are so big, people can't fathom that Pereira can beat them. If Pereira was in the heavyweight division, the guy would be in like the mid to high 230s, I would imagine. And if he wanted to gain weight too, 240s, a 230 to 240 pound Alex Pereira could knock any of these guys out, 100%. He's not small. The guy is even arguably bigger than Almeida is. By weight, he's around the same weight that Miocic weighed in some of his fights. He's not even too far away from Cyril Gane's weight. Cyril Gane's like maybe 10 pounds heavier. And in the heavyweight division, 10 pounds is not that much. Tom Aspinall, I would go with Aspinall. He takes him down and submits him. He would take him down and submit him. And then John Jones does the same thing. So John Jones and Tom Aspinall are very, very bad fights for him. Almeida's also a bad fight for him. Stipe could be theoretically if he wasn't as old as he is. Curtis Blades should beat him, but he doesn't have great fight IQ. Every other guy is a good style for Pereira to go up against. And then you have Romanov. Romanov should be able to beat him. That guy sometimes shows up as a different human being out there. And then we get to Incubus. Hey, Weasle, what are your top 5 fighters that you think have the ability to become 3 division champs? So it's another question about this. We've seen a handful of fighters become 2 division champs, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts of 3 division champs. Thank you. No problem, man. I think Alex Pereira has the best chance, at least right now. Then there is Henry Cejudo. So these are 2 guys that already became 2 division champs. They only need to win 1 more. And there is Conor McGregor. Okay, so let's look at Conor, Pereira, and Cejudo. who has the best chance of winning that next division belt? So firstly, I don't think any fighter is going to become a triple champ. It'd be amazing if they did. It's such an insane feat. But if there is a fighter, I think it would be Alex Pereira. And it's not because stylistically he can do it the best. It's because in the heavyweight division, there's a lot more chances, right? He has a lot of knockout power. He's an amazing striker. He's learning grappling enough. And if he was bigger, you can only imagine how much harder he could potentially hit. Imagine like a near 240 Alex Pereira hitting these heavyweights with that left hook or kicking out their legs. He would bring so many striking wrinkles to the heavyweight division that many of those fighters have never seen before. So because of that potential that he could knock out anyone, and he is getting better at grappling, I would say he has a better chance of becoming a triple champ than Henry Cejudo or Conor McGregor. Henry Cejudo, stylistically, he probably has the best chance. Just stylistically. But I don't think stylistically is enough for him to beat someone like Volk, right? Volk is so much bigger than him. He's so much stronger than him. He's so intelligent. I think it's a bit too much for Cejudo. So I'll go Pereira's number one, then Cejudo, then Conor McGregor. And then we go to Kevin Buchanan, Durance. Will you upload the podcast to Spotify again? Also, how would an alternate timeline where Jones fought Jan, then Glover, Jiri, etc. go? So like the current light heavyweights. Would he still be champion by the time Alex fights for the title? And would he beat him? I think he'd probably beat Jan and Glover. Maybe Jiri could land a big shot. Jamahal and Alex both have pretty good fight IQs combined with athleticism, so they'd probably beat Jones in my opinion. The podcast is Spotify. Yes, I'm trying to get that done. And then as for Jones up against the current light heavyweights, I think he beats Jan and Glover again. He out-wrestles Jan, and he does to Glover what he did before, if he wants. As for Jiri, I think Jiri might beat Jones on a decision. And the reason why I say this is because look what Dominick Cruz was able to do against Jones. Now imagine Jiri with the unpredictable kind of strikes and stuff he's able to do out there against someone like John Jones who relies completely off a game plan. Jones is a kind of fighter that needs to fight off a game plan. This guy literally dodged Chael Sonnen because he couldn't game plan for him on that short notice. And look what he fought Ovince St. Preux when he did take a fight on short notice. He didn't look that impressive out there. It is very hard to game plan against Jiri Prochazka. The guy has a lot of power. He's dangerous on the ground. He's very athletic. He's a very big guy as well. It could implement some of the stuff that Dominick Cruz did against Jones. So I would actually say I could see Jiri beat Jones by a decision, but it could go either way. On paper, Jones should be him, and on paper, Jones should be all of these guys. But sometimes it doesn't play out how it does on paper, and I think that's one of those fights. That's the fight that would at least play out like it does on paper. Now, as for Jamahal Hill and Alex Pereira, I think Pereira gets out-wrestled. I don't think he stops the wrestling. He gets submitted on the ground. Jones would not gas out the way Jan did either. But Jones wouldn't want nothing to do with the striking. I just don't think Alex would stop all the takedowns. I mean, he got taken down by Jiri Prochazka. Jiri can grapple, but he's nowhere close to Jones when it comes to wrestling. Not even close. I think Jamahal Hill would be the most difficult matchup for John Jones because he has good takedown defense. He is very athletic. He has high fight IQ. He has dangerous striking. He takes off good angles. He could implement what Dominick Cruz did against John Jones better than anybody else. He's also good with game planning. He's very good with preparation. I think Jamahal Hill would be the most difficult fight for John Jones, and I would actually pick him to beat Jones. I know there's a lot of people disagree with that, but I think Jamahal Hill is well-rounded enough, dangerous enough in the stand-up, powerful enough in the stand-up, and with that kind of intelligence to beat John Jones on the scorecards. Then we get to BTR show. Do you believe every champ wanting to become a double champ instead of a long-reigning champ is good for business? Are fans truly wanting to see every champ attempt to be a double champ? Or is it more of the fighters' desires and UFC doing whatever to get them a fight? Love the content. Keep it up, bro. Thank you so much, man. I think the casual fans like it. I think the hardcore fans only like it when it makes sense. The times it makes sense is like when a fighter's too big for a weight class and goes up, the way Alex Pereira did. If he wasn't too big, he wouldn't go up to light heavyweight, I believe. I think he would still be at middleweight. Or if a fighter cleans out his weight class and moves up. Those are the only two reasons that the hardcore fans would like to see a champion attempt to get another one. So Volkanovski is an example of the latter. When you talk about casual fans, they see two champions fighting. It's easy to sell, right? Champ versus champ is very easy to sell to the casual fans. And of course, it is also the fighter's desire. Every champion wants to become a double champ. Every single one. Number one, it's a bigger fight because more casual fans will watch them. Volkanovski's biggest fights were against Islam by a long shot. His max fights were not that big on pay-per-view. They were like 200,000 buys. But when he fought Islam, I think the rumors, I don't know if there's any exact number out there, but I think the rumors are like 500 and up. And there was also a much bigger buzz around those fights than they were against Max. Now, is that because it was champ versus champ? Is it because Islam is a big name? Is it because the casual fans know enough about Volkanovski and then saw the matchup against Islam? Maybe it's that kind of thing. I think it's a combination of things. And that's ultimately, I think, why they do put on some of these champ fights. Is this good for business? I think in the short term it is, but in the long term where it can hurt the product is that you water down the titles and you don't create that long reigning champ anymore. You know what I'm saying? The long reigning champs are ultimately the fighters that got the biggest names outside of Conor McGregor and Khabib. Look at Anderson Silva. Look at GSP, look at John Jones, look at Ronda Rousey. All these fighters are long reigning champs and they all were getting massive pay-per-view numbers. It didn't happen overnight. It was down the road because long reigning champs create an aura about themselves that they're just dominant or they're just so good, so skilled. The fans are curious to see anybody that could beat them. Allowing fighters to defend their belts repeatedly enough where they can create that aura for themselves is a way for them to get bigger as a star. And from there, chasing that special goal of becoming a 2-division champion would increase the viewership, I believe. This is why John Jones, GSP, and Volk moving up felt so special because they defended their belts so many times. Then look at Cejudo moving up or Pereira or DC. These fights weren't as big because they weren't long-reigning champions. One could say, oh, it's because Jones and GSP were superstars. That's why their fights were big when they moved up. Yes, 2 of them were superstars, and they became superstars because they were long-reigning champs. Jones moving up to heavyweight after beating Vitor, let's say, or GSP moving up after he beat John Fitch, these fights would not be nearly as big as when they actually did move up. And Volk wasn't a superstar like these two, and still, because he seemed like he was dominating his division, people cared to see him move up, as it did feel special. That special feeling about a dominant champion moving up sells way, way better. That's why I believe in the long term, these constant champ fights are not as good for business. Like for an example, let's take Leon Edwards, right? Leon Edwards is the guy who's talking about moving up. If he beats Colby and then moves up to middleweight, his fight with Sean Strickland would not be nearly as big than if he defended against, let's say, Colby, then Bilal, then Shavkat, then Burns, then, Ian Gary, something like that. If he defends his belt like multiple times, he'll create that dominant aura about himself, and moving up from there would actually make a very, very big pay-per-view card. Those are the biggest fights outside of megastars. Anderson Silva was not a big star when he became champ. He was a big star later down the road when he was able to defend his belt multiple times with big knockout victories, and that's why his Chael Sonnen fights were so massive. Would Chael Sonnen versus Anderson Silva be as big after Anderson defended his belt the first time? No, it wouldn't. It would not be nearly as big as it was because Anderson didn't have that aura about him at that time. But his Chael fights were massive. And then the Wyman rematch, because he beat Anderson, was over 1 million buys. It was Anderson's biggest fight of his entire career. Now imagine this, would the Wyman rematch be as big if Anderson defended his belt once and attempted to go at a double champ status and came back down? I don't think he would get half the pay-per-view numbers. Look at GSP. GSP was not a star in the beginning. He was a star as he was able to rack up these wins, avenge his losses, and then all of GSP's fights were getting big numbers after. Like, could you imagine how big Anderson Silva versus GSP could have been? I believe if Anderson fought GSP at middleweight or a catchweight, it would be the highest selling pay-per-view other than Conor McGregor fights. I think it would beat UFC 200. I think it would beat UFC 100. I can imagine that fight would get close to 2 million buys, maybe even surpass it. Look at John Jones. Nobody watches Jones because he's the most exciting fighter in the world, right? He's not a Robbie Lawler. Most people watch John Jones because he's the GOAT, He's the greatest. Even mainstream sports media talk about John Jones, and whenever they talk about John Jones, what do they say about him? He's the GOAT. He's the greatest. So the casual fans now know who's the greatest in MMA? Oh, it's that guy John Jones that I heard Shannon Sharp talk about. I'm going to watch that guy. And when they watch him, he wins. He always wins. They look at his record. He's beat big names. And that's why John Jones is able to sell 6, 7, 8, even up to 1 million pay-per-view buys. The rumors around the Cyril Gane fight was 1 million buys. The only 2 fighters that didn't get that kind of fame from being a long-reigning champion were Jose Aldo and Demetrius Johnson. And I think the only reason as to why that was is because they were smaller. Some people say, oh, Josiello was boring. Some of his fights, sure, he didn't put on good performances. He kind of rolled them out to a decision sometimes if he could do it. But then he did have one of the greatest fights of all time with Chad Mendes. He had a crazy knockout against Chad Mendes the first time. He had the big celebrations running into the crowd and stuff. But then why were besides the Conor McGregor fight, of course, why were his fights only selling 200 to 300 pay-per-view buys? Look at Demetrius Johnson. Demetrius Johnson has the record for most title defenses consecutively in UFC history, but his fights were selling even less than Jose Aldo's. In his case, I think it's because the flyweight division was new. Nobody wanted to see small guys fight. Now it's a different thing, especially I think with Brandon Moreno and Davidson Figueiredo. That's why I have to give a lot of credit to those two guys specifically, and Henry Cejudo, of course. But Cejudo bounced out of that weight class. Brandon Moreno and Davidson Figueiredo brought a lot of notice to the flyweight division. People started to like it a lot more, and the Mexican fans definitely got behind Brandon Moreno. He's a pretty big name over there, and they know that his rival was Davidson Figueiredo, and they put on some insanely good fights together. But Demetrius Johnson was kind of a victim of being the pioneer, him and Joseph Benavidez. And during those days, nobody wanted to see 5'3" guys fight. So TLDR, I think champ fights are good for business in the short term, but not as good in the long. Look to Tyler Henson. I'm a 6'5", 210-pound, 18-year-old man. I have a year of boxing experience as well. How much, if any, women can I beat in the top 15 of each weight class? So you're 6'5", 210, 18 years old with a year of boxing. 210 at 6'5" is, you have a pretty athletic build, I would guess. A year of boxing, if you don't know any grappling at all, you won't beat all of them. I know that for sure. Here's the thing. If you can catch, this is so weird to even talk about. If you can land one big shot on any of them, you would win. And you do have at least some boxing experience to know how to line up your shots correctly. But I would say there's a chance you could also lose to any of them as well. As soon as they get a hold of you and take you down, which they can absolutely do even being as light as they are. Or they don't even have to take you down all the way, just break your posture a little bit, get you off balance and jump on your back. Girls especially are a lot more flexible on getting your back like that. They do have the wider hips. They get around, get you in a choke. It could be a wrap. This is going to be true for pretty much all of the female fighters. I would say you would probably beat 30% of the top 15 of every division. And you're saying not in the cage as well, not in a sport. You got low blows, you got a lot of stuff that can work against you here, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, so I'm going to say in an AI metaverse, I would see you beating about 16 of them. And most of them are probably going to be on the lower end of the weight classes. But here's the thing though, if you did train for it, give you a year, I would favor you to beat every single one of them. If you learn how to defend a takedown correctly, I see you beating all of them. Bro, like for an example, when I went to an MMA gym and it was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu day, I was very new to grappling, and I got submitted left and right by this 110-pound purple belt. I was like in the high 170s, and this girl was literally smaller than every single girl in the UFC. Every single one. She was like 5'1", no more than 110 pounds. It was just a technique. I didn't know exactly how to maneuver my way around these grappling positions. I didn't even know how to break through the guard at all. She got me in full guard, and I literally did not know how to get out of it. I tried to pry open the legs using strength. I couldn't do that. I saw some fighters using the Americana, so I tried that on her in the full guard. That didn't work. She got me an armbar for that. Now, of course, there's no ground and pound involved, but I could only imagine she knows her way around that too. And that girl would even sniff the UFC. The furthest she ever went was amateur fighting. That was it. She never made it past amateur. And she lost some fights there too. And I know gyms do this sometimes. They will send some of their girl fighters up against guys just to kind of like show them how much skill actually matters here. So they'll do that sometimes. They'll put a girl up against a new guy who come into the gym just to show him the importance of technique and skill. Then we get to Matt Tutrol. How would Patchy Mix do against every fighter in the top 15 at the Bantamweight division? Thank you for the videos. I enjoy watching them. No problem, man. Thank you so much for the question. Patchy Mix is legitimate, dude. This guy is really, really good. Out of any of the Bellator fighters, this is the guy I recommend to keep your eyes on the most. So, top 15. In the bantamweight division, I think he beats Saeed, he beats Gutierrez, he beats Ricky Simon. I think he might lose to Umar, but it's hard to say right now. I gotta see more from Umar. I think he beats Martinez, beats Pedro, beats Cruz at this point, beats Ralph Font, completely outgrapples him. I think he could lose to Song Yadong. If Song could stop the takedowns, Song is annihilating. But Song's been taken down by guys who are not as good in the grappling as Patchy Mix. So I don't know. I think it's a 50-50. Sadly, he beats Chito and Petr Yan. I think he could implement a similar kind of game plan that Merab did against Yan, but threaten with a lot more submissions. More like Aljamain, actually. Petr Yan's got to up his output, man. He can't be fighting at this low activity anymore. That slow start against Patchy Mix is really going to hurt him. If Petr Yan was able to up his output, I think he's the best bantamweight. I think he could beat everybody. But with the way that he fights, the way he approaches a fight, he has such a massive weakness there with output. And Patchy Mix would absolutely capitalize on that. I think he beats Corey Sandhagen. I think Patchy Mix would get his back. You will see sometimes Corey still gives his back up when he's on the ground. Patchy Mix is like the second worst fighter at bantamweight to do that against, after Aljamain. So I do see Corey getting taken to the ground and then getting his back taken and submitted. On paper, Cejudo should beat him. He should stop all the takedowns, beat him on the feet. But that was the same thing with Aljamain. He lost to Aljamain. Very close fight, of course, but I would go with Cejudo because I look at Patchy Mix as like a little bit of a lesser version of Aljamain. That's why. So I think Cejudo would win this on a decision overall. Merab, I would go with Patchy Mix. I think Patchy submits him if it goes to the ground. Aljamain Sterling, I would go with Aljamain. And then Sean O'Malley. O'Malley could catch him easier than he did Aljamain. You know, I'll go with O'Malley. I'll go with O'Malley after that performance with Sterling. He defended some good takedowns too. Patchy Mix, though, could get it done. He could. So ultimately, I do think O'Malley beats him. Aljamain beats him. I think Cejudo beats him. I think Yan could if he approaches it the right way. Song's like 50-50. And I think Umar could beat him. I just got to see more from Umar. Is that jumping the gun a little bit on Patchy Mix? I don't know, man. I'm liking his skills. I'm liking what he's showing out there. I could be wrong, though. Maybe he loses to someone in PFL, but does that mean that Patchy Mix is overrated? Then we go to Pedro Correa. Did we all overrate Chimaev? He is a super dangerous grappler in the first round until he gasses out and becomes mid. He will not ragdoll these middleweights in the first like he did to Holland and the Leech, and will get stuck on the feet with powerful and better strikers. How far do you see him going at 185? Yes, so Chimaev is definitely overrated because everybody thought this guy would ragdoll everybody he fights. That's why. The expectations on Chimaev were so incredibly high, I don't think he was ever going to reach those expectations. I think I overrated him a bit too. But I did always mention that we got to see more from Chimaev before we know for sure. Right? There's a lot of fights that he went through that we just didn't get the full picture of him. But I did pick Gilbert Burns against him, so maybe I didn't overrate him. I don't know. The Burns fight showed a lot. He went through a lot of adversity in that one. And then the Usman fight. The only two top-ranked guys he went up against, he had a hard time with them. In the first round, it's shown this guy is way too dangerous of a grappler. He is. If you can get out of the first round with Chimaev, he becomes like, in the second round and after, he's kind of high level. Kind of. B tier, you know what I'm saying? Or if you know about football or the UFC game, first round Chimaev is like 95 overall. In the second round, he's like 89. Third round, he's like 87. And then I can't even imagine how much he falls off after that. So the 185ers are definitely much bigger than the 170ers. Going to make it a lot harder for him to ragdoll them the same way. I agree with this 100%. Even if you fight someone like Cannonier or Strickland, you know, guys that aren't really known for their grappling too much, I don't even see them getting ragdolled the way Holland or the Leech did. Just by the pure fact that they're so much bigger. And yeah, Strickland is big. He walks around at 216 pounds. That guy is very big. And because of that size factor and their understanding of Chimaev better than ever before, the more fights you see from Chimaev, the more you understand his style, the better these middleweights are going to perform against them too. And if he gets stuck on the feet with these guys, we've already seen that Chimaev is not a great striker at all. And the middleweight division is full of strikers. That's what these guys do. So if these big strikers are able to survive a first round onslaught of grappling, Chimaev is done for after that. If he can't take him down again, he's done for. Can you imagine if Cannonier is able to survive the first round and Chimaev gets stuck with him on the feet? It would be a slaughter. So how far does Chimaev go now? He's number 9 in the rankings, and we do know he's going to get higher ranked opponents, regardless of the number next to his name. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think Strickland beats him. I think he would beat Adesanya. I think Dricus beats him. I think Whitaker beats him. I think Cannonier could beat him, right? We don't see Cannonier get taken down too often, so it's hard to really know how much better his wrestling has actually gotten. But I do think Cannonier could absolutely beat him. He's the most dangerous guy if he survives the first round. I think he beats Vettori. We say Khamzat is mid after the first round. Vettori's mid all the time. So I think even on the feet, I could see Khamzat beating Vettori. Paulo Costa. It's a tougher fight now. This is a much more difficult fight for Khamzat. But I think Khamzat still beats him. I think Khamzat beats Delidze. I think Khamzat beats Allen because he is a better striker. Oh, Allen's ranked above Khamzat. Whoa, he's number 8. So yes, I think Khamzat would become a top 5 fighter. Could he have gotten better though? Because we have to remember that Khamzat's not old at all. This guy's young still. This guy's still not even 30. So if he gets better, learning from the Usman fight, he could get better and exceed the new expectations about him that he's not like a champion, you know what I'm saying? And we also do have to remember about the Usman fight. He was injured during it. So, but to answer your question, he's not as unstoppable as we originally thought. Then we go to Madara Uchiha. Hey Weasel, love your content. Here's some fantasy matchups, all in their primes, who wins and why do they win? I know this breakdown will probably take 5 minutes, but I would love for you to answer. Thanks, love you. Well, thank you so much, man. So Khabib and Islam versus a lot of guys. I'm just going to go through them really quickly. So Khabib versus Islam, I got Khabib. I know a lot of people these days would say Islam beats Khabib, but I don't think so. I think Khabib would put on too much pressure against Islam. He would take Islam down. Thiago Moises took down Islam. Khabib is definitely taking Islam down. I think Khabib would defend all the submissions and literally pummel him from top. Islam also backs up, where Khabib is always moving forward. Could Islam potentially catch him with a counter shot on the feet? Yes, possibly, but then better strikers than Islam tried, right? Better counter punchers, should I say. Conor McGregor tried to throw out some stuff. Dustin Poirier tried to catch him with some good stuff. Justin Gaethje did catch him with a few good shots, but that eventually didn't work out. Michael Johnson caught him once, but overall missed the majority of his punches. Those guys are good punchers, man. So I could see off of those, Khabib could defend and get under some of Islam's counter punches, take him to the ground against the fence, ground and pound him, soften him up, and I'm pretty sure Islam is not as tough as Khabib. He would not take the punishment the same way Khabib would. So I think a difference in toughness, Islam would eventually succumb to the pressure and ground and pound from Khabib and probably get TKO'd. Khabib versus Oliveira. I got Khabib, crushes him with ground and pound. Khabib versus Volk at 155. Khabib absolutely beats Volk. Khabib versus Tony. I got Khabib. I just wish that fight happened. Khabib versus Alvarez. Got Khabib. I think Khabib beats Benson Henderson. He beats Pettis. Islam versus Dustin. I got Islam. Islam versus Gaethje. I got Islam. Oliveira versus Volk at 155. I got Oliveira. Khabib versus Kevin Lee. I got Khabib. Islam versus Kevin Lee. I got Islam. I think Islam beats Pettis. He beats Alvarez. He beats Benson. And he beats Tony. They went to AJ Morningstar. Hypothetical matchups. Who do you think would win and why? Ikram Aliskerov versus Bo Nickel. Oh, Ikram absolutely beats him. He's one of the guys that can defend the takedowns. This guy is a very good grappler and a way better striker in every department. Bo Nickel is out of his element against someone like Ikram. Magomed Ankalaev versus Alex Pereira. I got Ankalaev because of wrestling. But then again, we saw the Jan Blachowicz fight went for Ankalaev. If that happens with Pereira, Pereira's going to beat him. Pereira will outstrike Ankalaev 100%. So it's not a given, but I think on paper, because of the wrestling advantage, Ankalaev should beat Pereira. Islam versus Gaethje, I got Islam. Takes him down. I don't think Gaethje stops the takedown at all. And Islam does not expose himself. He's actually going to force Gaethje to open himself up. And there goes the counter shots. There goes the takedowns. O'Malley versus Merab. I got Merab. I love O'Malley's style, man. I wish this guy would stay as champ. Just because of his fighting style. Outside of that stuff, like his whole personality, he seems like a cool guy, but it's a little over the top, in my opinion. The flashiness, you know. Merab would hold him against the fence for 5 rounds. That's it. I wouldn't want to say that. I would never like to see Merab win the belt doing that, but that's probably what would happen. Then we get the Genic check. How long do you think Sean O'Malley and Sean Strickland can defend their belts for? By the way, love the videos. Thank you so much. Strickland has a harder opponent in front of him than O'Malley does right now. So we know that Strickland's fighting Dricus and O'Malley's fighting Chito. Dricus can beat Strickland. I don't think Chito beats O'Malley. So because of that, I think O'Malley is going to hold on the belt longer. And it's because he got a more favorited matchup that really doesn't make sense in terms of meritocracy. Whereas Dricus was absolutely by merit. If O'Malley fought the rightful #1 contender the way Strickland is, if he fought Merab, I believe O'Malley has a much higher chance of losing the belt than Strickland. But because O'Malley's not fighting the #1 contender, and that's Merab's fault, that's not O'Malley's fault, that's Merab's and Aljamain's fault, I think Strickland has a much more difficult opponent in front of him. Whether it goes either way, I think Strickland versus Dricus is almost 50-50. O'Malley after Chito should fight Merab, if Merab beats Cejudo, that is, which is not a given at all. That's where I think O'Malley would lose. I think O'Malley would lose to Merab. He could lose to Aljamain in the second fight. He could lose to Corey Sandhagen, right? He has very difficult matchups in front of him, man. I think O'Malley has the most difficult path in front of him as a champion. Then we go to Nathan Gorman. What was it about Khabib's ground game that was so special? Like his ability to pin down his opponents and land ground and pound. And what were the small details that most people overlooked? And did he revolutionize MMA grappling? So I would say Khabib absolutely revolutionized MMA grappling. He didn't invent a lot of the stuff that he did, but he made them popular to the point where fighters who weren't really known for their grappling were starting to use techniques that Khabib would make popular, like the Dagestani handcuff, which is a wrist ride, of course. Locking the opponent's legs with his. Using the cage against the opponent for takedowns. For a long time, fighters are using the cage to get up. I mean, they're still kind of doing that, but Khabib showed a way to use the cage against the opponent, right? Trap him against the fence. Make them try to stand up, make them post and stuff, but then you throw in the Dagestani handcuff, you break that posture and just wail him in the face the whole time. So Khabib had a lot of good positions that he made popular, but also his ground and pound was absolutely ferocious. I think he's the greatest ground and pound artist in MMA history. I don't think there's a fighter ever that ground and pounds as well as he did. Everybody should be learning how to ground and pound like Khabib right now. Evolve from there. His ability to stack on the opponent with such heaviness was incredible. His tripod was very effective, and even as Dustin Poirier said, Khabib didn't feel like incredibly strong, but it's a technique he was able to use against him that felt like he couldn't even move, right? He couldn't even get up. He's always multiple steps ahead of his opponent. That's why a lot of people still to this day believe that Khabib is the greatest overall grappler ever in the UFC. Then we go to the Linsane man. Hey Weasel, I'm curious if you thought in the UFC, what weight class would you be in? Who is the one fighter at that weight class you would not want to face off against? Could be someone from present or the past. So, a lot of people do know that I did have like aspirations to fight. And my weight class would have been 145 or 155. If I was 145, I'd be very, very big there. So I think eventually I would have to move up to 155. And I do believe I'm like an average 155er. So I walk around in the low 180s and I'm 5'11". The fighter I would not want to go up against would be probably Movsar Evloev, for the fact that it would be the most annoying way to ever lose. Imagine getting held down for 3 rounds against a style like that. Win or lose, I would want the fight to be exciting, and I would prefer striking matches. I would not want to go up against guys who grapple like that, who would make the fight kind of lackluster. They're just looking to hold you down and stuff. It'd be awesome if you get a knockout against a guy like that. That would be awesome, right? Catch him with a knee and uppercut, something like that. But I think just because of my style, what I grew up learning, I'm a striker through and through. Wrestling has always been my biggest weak point. And all those days where I was taken down in the gym and held down, put in the most suffocating positions, it would feel so good to catch an uppercut for someone shooting at my legs for once. So in the 145 division, I would say it would be probably someone like Movsar. And then in 155 is pretty fun. I would say Arman Tsarukyan, just because he has that very good wrestling style. Same kind of reason. I would love to go up against Max Holloway. The kind of fighters I would love to go up against, if I could, let's say, would be like Max Holloway, or Justin Gaethje, or Charles Oliveira. That would be so fun, other than getting punched in the face and probably knocked out. Those kind of styles are pretty fun to go up against, I think. And that is ultimately the end of the episode, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to give this a like, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video.